Just after that meeting, Tony Windsor joined us from Tamworth. Tony Windsor, thanks for being there.
Pleasure, Tony.
Now, do you believe Tony Abbott has broken his word over the reforms to the role of the Speaker?
Yes, I think it's disappointing that he's gone down this path. It's quite obvious to me that there's no constitutional barrier to this. This is a matter of just arrangements within the Parliament where the opposite number to the Speaker could just abstain from voting as the occasions arose. So I am disappointed because I thought Tony had entered into the discussions in good faith. I know Arthur Sinodinos and Graham Morris from the Liberal side worked hard on some of these things, and I think it's disappointing that it's been torn up.
You're disappointed. Are you angry about it? I mean, it does put a rather large hole in the reforms. It already ruled out your colleague Rob Oakeshott from being Speaker.
Well, I wouldn't say I'm angry. I'm disappointed. And I think one of the things we were trying to assess right throughout this was trust in individuals. And I said at the time that I'd gained a greater regard for Tony Abbott through the discussions that we'd had. But I think it's taken a bit of a backward step again, that having gone down this pathway. But I think the Rob Oakeshott speakership arrangement is really part of a two-part story now, that this was about not pairing any speaker, not just an independent speaker. So I think Tony Abbott's had his mind made up right from the word go on this, and probably been trying to stretch it out to get us close to the start of the Parliament and maybe potentially wreak some havoc.
Yes, I mean, will it cause havoc? Will it cause some chaos leading into the first week of the new Parliament?
Well, it shouldn't, but it could, and obviously it makes the arrangements a bit more difficult, obviously for the government, and that seems to be the strategy of the opposition now, that they make it as difficult as possible, which is a change from the sort of good faith negotiations that were going on in relation to the procedural changes. I'm sure if Tony Abbott was now the Prime Minister, he'd be very disappointed if Julia Gillard committed the same deal today upon him as upon him it's been done today by Abbott himself.
Does this actually change your mind about the nature of the negotiations you were having with Tony Abbott? You've said there's a question over whether they were actually in good faith.
Well, I think it goes to the issue of trust and stability, and one of the things we were looking for, or I was looking for in terms of the fortnight after the election, was who was actually interested in stability, and who could we trust to go the distance, in a sense. Tony Abbott didn't win the prize in a sense, but I think it's gone to that issue of trust, and in some ways I think it's vindicated what we did. For those who are out there suggesting we should have done something else, well, a hung Parliament and the way the Parliament works and the good faith negotiations that are required to make it work have to be based on some degree of trust, and I don't think the constitutional excuse that was used today is good enough in terms of this particular issue.
OK, let's look at Tony Abbott's side of the argument. He says he's only rejecting this one small part of the parliamentary reforms because he now has advice saying that the pairing of the Speaker is actually unconstitutional. You're saying that's not true, but he's saying it is. Where do we stand? I mean, it's different advice at 20 paces.
Well, it is. But irrespective of the advice, the arrangement in good faith could be operated in the Parliament. There's no doubt about that, whether it had been Rob Oakeshott or Harry Jenkins. Those arrangements can be put in place. We see it all the time where there might be a late night sitting and some members of Parliament have got to catch early aeroplanes, or there might be a late night debate where both sides square off by arrangement between the whips, etc. So it would have been an extension of things that are happening now. And given the fairly unique nature of this Parliament, I'm just disappointed that what we seem to be putting together was an arrangement where both sides would recognise the difficulties that whoever the government was going to have in terms of the speakership, and now we've sort of reverted to the old game of you be the government, we'll be the opposition, and our job is to destroy you. Well, I'm not quite sure that's what the Australian public would want out of a hung parliament at this particular time. Has
this move by Tony Abbott caused you at all to rethink your position on whether you would want to be Speaker?
No. Oh, I don't care who's Speaker, but as long as it's not me. No, I'm not interested in the Speaker, and no one's really approached me to do that because I made it very plain at the start that I wasn't interested, so don't bother offering.
Now, assuming Labor then is going to have to appoint a Speaker from its own ranks, is this necessarily going to make the government less stable?
Well, it removes a majority of one from the agenda. So in that sense, it makes it less stable. If there's a by-election or someone's absent, by not having the Speaker paired, it really takes him out of the game as being a player, and that's got to have an impact on the government. I don't think there's any other way of looking at it, and obviously that's the decision that the coalition has made. They're here to undermine the government. They told us when we were talking to them that they were keen for a hung parliament to go the 3 years, if at all possible. Well, I think that's gone out the window too. Now, I think the background noise that I was hearing that if they had become the government, that they would have looked for an early outcome in terms of an early election. I think those sorts of rumours and telephone calls are being vindicated by the pathway that Tony Abbott's taking now.
Does this make it more or less likely, well, does it make it more likely, let's put it that way, that the government will not last now for 3 years?
Oh, I think it potentially can hold together, but it's obviously a weakening of strength. That doesn't mean it can't last the distance. But obviously with one less vote, there's got to be one more vote from the crossbenchers for anything to happen, and the likelihood of a no-confidence motion is heightened a little bit if someone within the Labor Party, for that matter, decides that they've had enough, or one of the crossbenchers gets annoyed about something. I think most people on the crossbench will address this in the way in which they've spoken about it in the past, though I don't think there's anybody on the crossbench that actually wants to be a wrecker, seeing we've been through all the pain to put something together. But I think it's quite clear now that the coalition's agenda will be to wreck rather than be constructive. And I think that's a shame because Tony Abbott has 72, the Labor Party have 72. You could have seen a parliament where both sides put forward constructive legislation, actually had constructive debates. But I think what's happened today is an early warning signal that this is going to be business as usual. The gloves are back on, and we're here to wreck rather than construct.
Given that stable government was one of the key criteria that caused you to go for Labor in the first place, do you have any regrets?
No, not at all. In fact, recent events of recent days have vindicated that decision. I'm quite comfortable. I haven't woken up at night thinking I've done something wrong. And I had a meeting with my constituents tonight, 400 people. Went to a theatre in Tamworth and for 2 hours spoke about the issues and answered questions on why we did this and why I did that. And it was quite touching at the end. Not everybody stood up, but a lot of people stood up and gave me a clap. So I think people are very fair. They realise that it was a hard process. We didn't ask to be placed there, but I'm pleased with the decision I've made now, and the further I get away from it, the more relaxed I am that I've made the right one.
It's interesting to hear you say that, because Tony Abbott himself said very recently that he'd be working to woo the independents back onto his side, and he was actually hoping that sometime in the not-too-distant future he might be able to achieve that, and that you'd flip over and basically allow him to put a coalition government together. You think that's now less likely to happen than you might have imagined?
Well, his early warning signs aren't good. That's a love note coming towards us. I must pick it up and read it the other way. I don't see that as being terribly constructive. What's happened today?
Do you think he's deliberately antagonising you at this point?
Oh, no, I wouldn't say that. I think he's just made a mistake. And bearing in mind, if there is a baton change halfway through this, he's going to place himself in exactly the same position as he now placed Julia Gillard in. So I just, the two issues that he's talking about, a baton change and then making it difficult for the current government to exist, I can't see how they team up together in that sense. So he's just created a rod for his own back if he expects to woo the independents to have a baton change. He'll be one down on the numbers.
We've got a little time left. Let's just have a look at one of the other main issues Tony Abbott brought up today. He says, and we know the government will now task the new Parliamentary Climate Change Committee, when it's set up, to examine the option of a carbon tax. Now, Tony Abbott says this is the first product of a secret deal between Labor and the Greens. Do you agree with him?
No, not at all. In fact, in the secret deal that I did with the Labor Party, one of the things that I put in my request to Julia Gillard and to Tony Abbott, for that matter, was that we step back from this debate, this great big new tax debate, and actually let's have a look at what's happening globally in terms of some of the issues that are out there. Let's revisit some of the Garno stuff again, update it and look, see what's happening. But I come from a slightly different perspective on this as well, and I raised this issue in my town hall meeting there a while ago, that there's a tremendous amount of opportunity for regional Australia in the renewable energy game. And the solar, the wind, geothermal, biofuels, those sorts of things, nearly all of them would have to be located in the country. And even if we go to sequestering carbon from coal-fired power stations into the future, a lot of that activity and economic activity would potentially happen in the country as well. So I think we've got to look at the opportunities here. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean we have a market-driven system. It could, but let's have a look at it. Let's investigate the opportunities. And the fact that some within the business community are starting to say, look, we'd rather have some certainty, even though there might be some downside to the uncertainty, we'd rather have certainty in relation to this particular issue. So let's debate it. I don't have a problem at all.
Was your view at all influenced when you saw, or by what you saw Marius Kloppers say, the chief of BHP Billiton, suggesting we need to move quickly to a price on carbon, a carbon tax is the first measure that should be brought in the short term?
Well, I don't know whether I'd go that far at this time, but I think it is appropriate for us to have the debate. I don't think we want to answer the debate before we've had it. And I think we should step back, look at all the options, the alternatives, where we can go to make a difference, what it'll mean in terms of the nation, and then make a decision. I don't think making the decision at the start and then having a committee to try and formulate the decision you've already made is the appropriate way to go. I think a very open and transparent process would be absolutely ideal.
Well, a quick final question then, because the Parliamentary Climate Change Committee appears to be where this debate will mostly take place, but Tony Abbott has forbidden any members of the coalition from joining it. Doesn't that stymie the debate before you start?
Well, from their point of view, it does. I think it's a shame too, because Greg Hunt's got an enormous contribution to make, and Malcolm Turnbull as well. I think, why can't we free a few of these minds up? Why has it got to be so confrontationist? There were real advantages in a hung parliament, as I mentioned earlier, and Tony Abbott seems to be wanting to throw them away right at the start rather than actually have a go at it.
OK, Tony Windsor, we're out of time. I'll have to leave you there. We thank you very much once again for coming to join us on Late Line.
Thanks very much, Tony.